Welcome everybody to this week's Hot Politics Lab meeting. We're super happy to have Myrto Pantazi here. She's an assistant professor in social psychology here at the University of Amsterdam. She studies basic psychological mechanisms of human belief and behavior, and her research focuses on the psychology of misinformation, belief in conspiracy theories, and other aspects of digital citizenship. Is that about right?
Wow, yeah, that's an excellent summary. Actually, you helped me skip my first slide. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, as Linda already said, yeah, I work on these two broad topics. So I, on the one hand, study socio-cognitive aspects of misinformation, so factors that make people vulnerable to misinformation, and how taking them into account we can, combat the problem. And my second line of research is on the social and political psychology of conspiracy beliefs. And when I was first invited to present here, by the way, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm really glad to be here because I've been following your lab, but I don't think we've ever properly been introduced. So it's nice to be here. But yeah, I was hesitating a bit as to whether I would present one or the other. I finally ended up with this one. I hope you like it. Okay, so yeah, conspiracy theories. When we hear the term, it's often negative. So you tend to relate these to negative sociopolitical events like anti-vax attitudes or the storm of the Capitol after the last US elections. And, there is a good historical reason for this. You probably all know this book by Richard Hofstadter. He was one of the first to actually study scientifically the notion and the phenomenon of conspiracy theories. And basically, the argument was that this is, an example of a paranoid style in citizens' thinking. And that sort of set a trend, let's say, in the theorizing and study of conspiracy theories that's prevalent even today. And actually, in my talk, I would like to maybe take a step back, or let's say offer not a more positive, but a more, let's say, nuanced view of conspiracy theories and the role in society and in politics. And I want to start with the definition that we use, at least that's a definition by social psychologists. I don't believe they differ so much from the definitions used in political science. But basically, according to this definition by Douglas and colleagues, conspiracy theories are ultimately attempts to explain social and political events and situations based on the presumed, hidden activities by by two or more powerful actors. So, you have this definition, which basically doesn't say much about whether these theories are or should be negative for society and for democracy. Yes?
Sure. Are we going to be agnostic?
Yeah, actually, no. I mean, in this definition, we are, because we don't, and I think it's a point that they do in this paper, and we often do in social psychological papers, where we, let's say, intentionally leave out the question of whether conspiracy theories are real or not. And actually, I had a slide that I decided to hide because I didn't have the time, but there are some conspiracy theories that turn out to actually be true. Like if you think about the Watergate scandal, it used to be a conspiracy theory that turned out to be true after the evidence started to come in. So indeed, for the purposes of our work, we remain somewhat, we leave the question as to whether they are true or not aside, because basically the psychology that underlies belief in these theories is not, let's say, it's blind to whether they are true or false. Okay. All right. So yeah, I was saying that this definition is let's say neutral in a way, and yet what we see is that research on this topic overwhelmingly focuses on negative correlates or negative characteristics of these theories. And you have first research on individual characteristics, so what characterizes conspiracy theorists or people who believe in these theories. And you have characteristics like schizotype, paranoid ideation, primary psychopathy, tendency to conspire. So the more people believe in these theories, the more they are willing to conspire themselves. You have Machiavellianism and even engagement in everyday crime. So you see all these negative correlates, basically. And if we want to zoom in a bit in the political realm, in terms of political attitudes or political stances they are correlated with, we again have empirical studies documenting a relationship with illegal political activities like violent protests, reduce trust in elections and also participating or participation in elections. And we have this increasing, let's say, literature on the relationship with political ideology, political extremism. There is some debate around this, but generally conspiracy theories or belief in conspiracy theories is assumed to have a curvilinear relationship with political ideology, so be more pronounced at the extremes of the political spectrum. Although some studies tend to document more linear relationships, like with extreme, well, mostly right, some with extreme left. But there is this, let's say, there is some consensus that they tend to correlate with the extremes. And now you know, there is this image that is being painted that this is problematic for our societies and for democracy ultimately, right? So the overarching research question that I will be addressing today with the studies I will be presenting is, do conspiracy beliefs ultimately really pose a threat to democracy? And of course, I'm going to answer this question from a political psychology perspective. So what individual citizens do. It's not a systemic approach, let's say. Study one, by study, I mean basically articles. So in total, I will be presenting 3 articles that I call studies here. Sorry for any confusion. So study / article 1 was more specifically concerned with whether conspiracy beliefs negatively predict attitudes towards democracy, so support for democracy at the individual level. We first started because at the time when we designed these studies, basically, you know, there was all this debate, but there was no direct evidence as to whether actually people who believe in conspiracy theories really tend to not support or say, you know, I'm against democracy. So what we did in this first study is measure the extent to which people believe in conspiracy theories. We generally tend to use 2 measures of conspiracism. That's what I'm going to call it from now on in the presentation. So you have on the one hand conspiracy mentality, which is this generalized tendency to view the world in conspiratorial terms. And it's like as psychologists tend to think this is some sort of a disposition. So it's an individual characteristics, let's say. And then you have also conspiracy beliefs. So this is the extent to which people believe in certain conspiracy theories. And for this measure, we selected, we selected some theories that are popular in the countries that we studied each time. So this is a UK study. An example conspiracy theory was the death of Princess Diana, which is quite a popular one in the UK. And I forgot to say the conspiracy mentality is a validated scale by Bruder and colleagues. And then we measured support, explicit support for 4 different types of democracy. So we had support for representative democracy, of course, but we also measured support for direct democracy, Support for stealth democracy. This is, another term for, let's say, technocratic or technocracy-based democracy. And support for deliberative democracy, which is a specific type of direct democracy where decisions are based on citizens' deliberation, basically. So this process of arguing and debating. Yeah, data were collected online. All the studies were collected online. Data collected through Prolific. And first of all, well, we do find a positive correlation between the two conspiracy belief measures. That's expected. It's what we wanted. But what is interesting here is the correlations we observe between the two conspiracism scales and support for the different types of democracy. So we do see, as as we hypothesized, that conspiracy beliefs are negatively correlated with support for representative democracy. But what is interesting is that there is a positive correlation with support for other types of democracy. So direct democracy more specifically, and stealth democracy. Deliberative democracy did not turn out to be correlated for some reason. And based on these findings, we then went on to design a vignette experiment. So many of the studies today are this type of experiments, where we try to put citizens in a position where they imagine being part of a certain society. So we kind of try to manipulate the way they view society. Well, this applies more to the next vignette studies. In this one, we tried basically to reverse engineer a bit and said, okay, if there is this relationship between political attitudes and conspiracism, and you see people who believe in those theories wanting more direct democracy, what happens if you give them this type of democracy? So what happens if you satisfy this this preference that they have? And our hypothesis was that this might reduce basically their perceptions of conspiracies, because you somehow restore these grievances basically that make them reject the representative democracy and prefer direct democracy. So we asked participants to read about one fictitious country, which we conveniently named Myrtonia, and we gave some general information about the country. So we described the country in quite neutral terms, like a normal country that I don't know, has like good internal politics, like good international relationships, not being in war and so on. And the thing that we manipulated was the regime. So we described in one condition Myrtonia as a representative democracy, and we specified that this means people come to the go to elections every 4 years, go to vote. And in the direct democracy condition, we specified that it's the citizens who make the decisions for most important policy issues. And then we measured, so we modified the measures of conspiracism. So we used basically the validated conspiracy mentality scale to ask to what extent people perceived that there were conspiracies in this country. And we also asked them to report as fictitious or imaginary citizens of the country, to what extent they would feel powerless or cynical. And what we see is that basically the direct democracy manipulation reduced all three variables. So reduced the extent to which people believed in conspiracy theories here to the right, or perceived, let's say rather, they perceived conspiracies in this fictitious country. And it also reduced the extent to which they would feel powerless and cynical. And basically, we also tested mediation models. So it looks like this positive, or rather negative, effect of direct democracy on conspiracism was mediated by reduced powerlessness and reduced cynicism. So it looks like if you yeah, both indirect effects were significant. So it looks like if you actually give those people, you know, this alternative that they want, this can somehow help mitigate the problem, right? It helps address their grievances, and it can actually make them less conspiratorial. These are vignette studies, of course. I mean, it's a question to what extent you can generalize to like real country or real world political attitudes, but there is some indication here. And yeah, the other take home from this study is that, you know, conspiracy beliefs don't seem to be indiscriminately negatively related to support to democracy. It's like they distinguish between different types of democracies. Yeah, this is the article where this was published. And I will move to the next one, where here we basically kind of looked at the flip side of the question, of the overarching question. So this time we were interested in whether conspiracy beliefs are related to autocracy. So, you know, the negative, the more negative part, let's say. Yeah, did I want to? Okay, in the first study, we document basically that we measured, again, the two conspiracies measures, support for autocracy, and then also powerlessness and cynicism as potential mediators. These were data from Greece, again, through Prolific. And basically what we see is that conspiracism is positively related, as we expected, to autocracy, and that this relationship is, well, we were a bit surprised, but I don't have much time to go into that, but explained more by feelings of powerlessness than by political cynicism. And based on this correlational study, again, we then moved on to like an experimental design. And again, the setup was the same. We asked participants to imagine being citizens of a fictitious country. Now we changed the name. But this time we manipulated basically to what extent. So we tried to simulate a conspiracist worldview, and we tried to increase the extent to which people in this fictitious country, again, would perceive conspiracies. So in the no conspiracy conditions, we told participants that politicians in Vilemi are generally reliable and corruption rarely occurs. The few cases that occurred in the past were always caught and brought to justice. In the conspiracy condition, it was the opposite. So it's a lot of corruption, never caught, even if it's caught, like the judges are colluding with the politicians. So it's close to what you know, people who believe in political conspiracy theories perceive the society to be. We measured autocracy, again, powerlessness and cynicism. This sample is from US. And we see basically that, as we expected, increased perceptions of conspiracies, so the conspiracy manipulation, increased support for autocracy, increased political cynicism, and increased feelings of powerlessness in, again, the context of this fictitious country. We tested again the mediation, and the results seem to be similar as with the cross-sectional data. So what seems to explain the increase in autocracy as a result of increased conspiracy beliefs is powerlessness, not so much cynicism. And yeah, basically, that's it. We did establish that there is a positive link between conspiracy beliefs and autocracy that is explained largely by feelings of powerlessness. The third study is an attempt to basically try and bring together these two approaches, because the two findings may seem somewhat contradicting, like mutually contradicting, right? On the one hand, you have support for like conspiracy beliefs basically being linked to support for more direct democracy, which is quite different from autocracy. But you see these two positive correlations that we somehow tried to explain. So the question we asked here is, within the same individuals and within the same data, basically, we try to see whether conspiracy beliefs would be simultaneously linked to both of these alternatives, but also to other alternatives. And our reasoning was that basically this apparently contradicting, let's say, relationship or two-pronged relationship is because basically people, or these people, so conspiracy believers, tend to reject the status quo as it is. So they want to change this, and they prefer anything else to what they have. So yeah, I'm only presenting one study from this paper because I think I don't have much time, but the manipulation is similar to the previous vignette study. So again, we tried to manipulate perceptions of conspiracy theories in a fictitious country. We measured this time, on the contrary, support for different alternative political regimes. So representative democracy, but also direct democracy, also anarchism, autocracy as before. And then we mainly focused on rejection of status quo as the potential mediator. So what would explain basically all of these relationships. And yeah, bingo, we find that as we expected, the like pro-conspiracy conditions, so where people perceived more conspiracies, basically increased all the outcomes. So status quo, rejection, cynicism, support for direct democracy, but also anarchism and autocracy. The only thing it reduced was support for representative democracy, as we expected. And for most of these relationships, so relationship between conspiracy beliefs on the one hand and political alternative, we found that status quo was the main, let's say, underlying mechanism. For support for representative democracy, cynicism also seemed to play a role. But for direct democracy, it was only status quo rejection. For autocracy, weirdly enough, only for autocracy, it was only cynicism that seemed to explain the link. And support for anarchism, it was both paths were significant. So yeah, basically conspiracy beliefs seem to be, simultaneously linked to preference for any alternative. And this seems to be largely explained by status quo rejection. So, an unliking and a will to change basically the status quo. So I don't know how I'm in terms of time, but yeah. Yeah, it's basically reiterating what I've just said, but what we see is that conspiracy beliefs ultimately they seem to be linked with both pro and anti-democratic alternatives. An interesting insight, I think, from this is that there seems to be some space for I'm not going to say intervention, but if there is some space that if you give people part of what they need, it might sort of mitigate the problem. So if you implement some direct democratic solutions, maybe in some contexts, it could help, alleviate the problem and reduce conspiracism. And basically, the main take-home message is that the relationship between conspiracy beliefs and support for democracies is a bit more intricate than, just conspiracism is all bad and all against democracy. There seems to be some nuance. Yeah, and I hope we've started scratching the surface. Yeah, I'm going to stop here, and I'm happy to discuss about this.
Yes, from a conceptual analysis standpoint, I find your findings to be really fascinating. And what they seem to suggest to me is that people who engage in conspiratorial ideation reject the notion that representative democracy is actually part of the concept of democratic governance. And that far from being pathological, I think that's actually like a view that we should take rather seriously. They might, for instance, argue that representative democracy, in fact, has another name that we might know it by, and that's oligarchy. And so, if they're rejecting that, then yeah, maybe there's something to what they're suggesting here.
Yeah, it's a question slash comment, right?
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah.
But I guess what do we do with that? Because clearly they accept some form of or some theory of democratic rule. So I guess when viewed from that angle, it's not actually a threat to democratic theory writ large. So what is it actually a threat to?
Well, it is a threat to the status quo. I think that's the main, right. So representative democracy as it is practiced and implemented in the current context. I think that's the main message. So yes, if you want to think about or talk about theories and democratic theory, I think you're right that it's not. It's not about the core principle. I think it's more about the implementation, basically here. And I think that's actually a very interesting question that, I don't know if there would be a way to try and distinguish in measurement terms. I mean, these two things and see if it's indeed the principle or the implementation of representative democracy that these people would be against. Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah, I will. Yeah.
Giovanni?
Yeah. Thanks again for the presentation. Really enjoyed it. I was just wondering about the manipulation that you had for corruption. And I just felt funny if I was the one responding, I felt also that could tap into procedural fairness of corruption rather than conspiracy beliefs, right? So that then if people would maybe really react thinking about corruption rather than conspiracy, because I didn't become inspirational by reading it, perhaps.
Well, maybe you did, but you don't acknowledge it. Nobody wants to say they believe. But no, I get your point. Sorry, were you finished? Or, yeah. No, I agree, and I like we got this comment also by reviewers at some point that is this really manipulating conspiracies? But I guess part of the argument here is that the way or this. Ultimately conspiracy theories, and I think it also addresses your first question at the beginning of the presentation, is a variation, let's say, of perceptions of corruptions that are hidden and that go unnoticed, basically. And so conceptually speaking, there is no so big a gap between corruption and conspiracy and perception of corruption and perception of conspiracies in society, if you see what I mean. Because based on our definition, we do leave that aside, and there is research that addresses these more epistemological aspects, but for these purposes, we do leave that aside. And because, as I said, you have examples of conspiracy theories being true, and especially in the domain of politics. So it's kind of it's tricky to really say that I'm only going to study the psychology of false conspiracy theories, right? I hope I answered you.
funny because we converged already.
Okay.
I just started supervising Giovanni recently, and he asked my question. I don't know what's going on, but I also had a question about the manipulation, and what it made me think about is that perhaps what you're manipulating is them thinking about the status quo when you show them this corrupt society. So
Right.
they basically think this is the representative democracy, this is the system that we know, this is, and the alternative is what we are striving for, right? So where actually there is fair procedures, etc. Rather than
Right.
conspirational thinking. I don't know if you have, and then you know by extension you assume okay there are conspiracies in that society because this is the society that is the status quo for us.
Right. Okay. Well, we do have another study where we more directly like manipulate the status quo in this last paper. So because we said okay, we based on our definition, we believe the first manipulation is about or perceptions of conspiracism. Then we implement a manipulation where we basically try to manipulate rejection of the status quo, but without any allusion to conspiracy. So it's not about hidden plots and things like that, but it's more like, the political status quo, let's say, does not represent the majority's will and so on. So we do make this distinction conceptually and empirically in the paper. Yeah, I get your point that maybe it could be that they reject the status quo, but the question is why do they reject the status quo, right? And in this case, the reason why, like the most salient characteristic, is that they reject it because there is all this collusion behind the scenes. Like we don't talk about. So what distinguishes basically the two vignettes is that here we don't talk at all about whether this serves the citizens or whether there is any negative effect on the society. Like we say that in general, in both conditions, like the economy is okay, things function, but it's just these things behind the scenes that are constantly operate. Yeah, I guess it's a bit open, and I do see your point. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Fascinating topic, really cool studies as well. I was wondering if you have looked into mental health correlates, because I was especially intrigued by the powerlessness mediation there, and I'm looking at it from a different angle where like powerlessness in response to certain societal threats, where people just throw their hands up in the air, oh, there's nothing I can do. And then powerlessness, and also especially if we see that in the mediation, you're almost immediately thinking about depression there, right? Because they're linked so much. So do you have any insight on who's more likely to believe in it, or how does it affect people's mental health? Is there anything out there?
There is research, not by me, but there is research on this on the link, and it's quite negative. I mean, not the research, but the findings are. They suggest indeed that there is a relationship there between decreased basically mental health. But what I should have specified probably, and I didn't, is that powerlessness here, because I didn't talk much about maybe not at all for powerlessness, about the measures. So it is political powerlessness. So all the items are about how powerless do you feel in relationship to politics, like in terms of your, I don't know if that's what you had in mind, or some more individual level, like in your personal life or in your, outside, let's say, the political realm. But I would expect that there is, for sure, three-way relationship.
Yeah, super interesting. And also the directionality would of course be interesting, right? Like what's driving what here. But
Yeah. And I can send you some references if you're interested in the mental health. Yeah.
That connects to my questions. I actually just analyzed some data where we do find a correlation between greater belief in conspiracy with the scale that you used, actually, conspiracy belief, and worse mental health, and worse political domain specific mental health as well. And my question is, we actually found that those who believe in conspiracy belief reappraise their emotions more. So I was wondering what you think about kind of the purpose or the psychological kind of mechanism that conspiracy beliefs kind of hold for the individual, more on a psychological lens. So what does it do for people?
So can you explain a bit more what you mean by reappraise? Like in what
so
way?
for reappraise
like
your
it's-
emotions. So
yeah.
it's a emotion regulation
Yeah.
technique.
Yeah,
So you kind of change how you think about the thing that's happening.
yeah,
So people who believe in conspiracies tend to reappraise their emotions more. So maybe like conspiracies are a way to reappraise a very difficult and confusing world.
yeah. Yeah. I was trying to think if yeah, I asked if you had some more specific like emotion to emotion reappraisal, or it's more
It's,
generically
you know, the
the
ERQ. Emotion
okay, yeah, right. Actually, yeah, that touches upon a very recent project. We did some work on resentiment, which I don't know if you know the term. It's not resentment, it's a different, more complex
yeah.
emotion, and it's this feeling that it's eating you from inside, and it's specifically in the political realm. And we also find, so I think this aligns well. We find a positive relationship. In terms of what it does, what I know, I haven't done, and this is just beginning of research on the emotions of conspiracism, but we do know that basically, like a decade back, there was this idea that they do help you to cope with uncertainty and lack of control. But actually, most recent research suggests it's not good for you. So it's basically, unlike what we thought, there was this idea that it's a control recovering mechanism, but it looks to be the other way around. So not only you believe in conspiracy theories because you are more uncertain, but also believing more makes you more uncertain. So it's like this vicious cycle that, it's not good. Yeah.
Sabu?
Yeah. I was wondering as well about so you found, if I'm correct, that conspiracy belief or mentality
Mhm.
that is positively related to the support for direct democracy, but also autocracy, for example. Which could mean, and I do think it's a good assessment, that it might be just the rejection of the status quo.
Mhm.
But I was also wondering, what if you have some people that are especially pro-autocracy, and some people that are especially pro the direct democracy as different options that they go for? Because my assumption is these two are not positively
Yeah.
correlated.
Well, they are, weirdly enough, in our samples, they are positively correlated. Yeah, yeah. So you really do see this, at least in this context, this positive correlation between support for any alternative. Yeah, to answer your question, we did run some moderation analysis with political ideology, for example. We did think that maybe it's right-wing that turn more to autocracy and left-wing people that turn more to direct democracy. We didn't find any such evidence. So it's strange because it looks to be regardless of individual level political orientation. And now we do have some research that is more on the relationship between populism and support for alternatives. And there we seem to find that it's basically support for social justice that seems to do the trick to some extent. So people who support more social justice are more pro direct democracy, whereas those who do not are more pro autocracy, let's say. But yeah, we don't have data specifically for the links with conspiracies. But yeah, I do agree there must be some or there could be on top of that some individual level mechanisms that would be interesting to look at. Yeah. Yeah.
And if I think about democratic transitions that we see, it's not so much a transition from representative to direct democracy that we're seeing out the world, as well as the hollowing out of the institutions of representative democracy. And so I was wondering if you did anything specifically with this, so to have specific policy proposals that, for example, would take away the independence of the judiciary.
Mhm. To take it out, to take it away
Yeah.
as part of an autocratic. Yeah, okay. Yeah. That's a very good idea. No, we didn't. It's true that we didn't look into the specifics, and it would be interesting because it could partially also address your question, Gustavo, on you know, different like specifics of alternative policies as opposed to, you know, overarching labels of alternatives. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting, but we didn't get into that because, you know, our first goal was just to, as I said, touch the surface. So yeah,
And they also,
you
yeah, I wonder if you're measuring their activities. Yeah, it seems to me that, yeah, what you're measuring is indeed just support for anything else rather than support for specifically anarchism specifically.
well, yeah, we did in the items we used, it was explicated like what autocracy. So we didn't just ask one item, would you support autocracy? We asked items that describe the way an autocracy works. So it's like a strong leader that you know, doesn't account to anyone and takes all the decisions and so on. And likewise for direct democracy, it was like the description of, okay, it's citizens that make the policy decisions.
They seem to favor all other alternatives.
Yeah.
These alternatives are mutually.
I know, yeah, I know. That's counterintuitive, yeah.
Yes. I would suggest.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah. Okay.
It's also, again, convert to Gustavo and now guys can relate to the party. But you said it's social justice that seems to be driving it. I could suggest an alternative, which would be a favorable outcome. And if that's the result of the political system, that might explain both preference for authoritarianism and also for the democracy. And then I can also suggest maybe the work of Hannah Werner, who I think was a part of this club as well for a while, has a paper on support for referenda, so direct democracy. And she says, I think her title is "If I Win It, I Want It." Basically, people say that they want a referendum if the outcome is the outcome that they favor.
Yeah.
And that could then also explain why the people that don't see the outcomes delivered to them, right?
Yeah.
And prefer any kind of alternative.
Yeah. Yeah, I that's a very good suggestion. We do have it's a different like research thing, but we do some have research on procedural justice and conspiracies. And unlike what you suggest, because in procedural justice theory there is this distinction between outcome favorability and process. And what seems to be the most correlated is the process, the fairness of the process, and not the outcome. But it's a slightly different field, and I do agree that, and actually, yeah, just to undermine a bit these findings, there is other research that finds basically with other type of data, like real voting data, that conspiracy believers do not necessarily participate more. So you know, this is in theory, but in practice, what happens is a different matter. Yeah.
Thanks for a very interesting presentation. I have a comment and that builds on this and a question following that. So also a suggestion basically for a follow-up study. And then no. The two finger for myself, you mean? No, I was wondering, so when you have a conspiracy belief, right? Also when you have the more conspiracism kind of way of thinking, which is a more deeper lying thing, it's always connected to a specific situation you're in, right? You also focus on the status quo and you focus on, or your point was about all the possible alternatives. So I was wondering, it would be interesting to examine to what extent your results will be different in a system that is more authoritarian than what you have studied now, or
Yeah.
where you have more direct democracy,
Yeah.
like Switzerland or maybe California, I think, right? It's the American state where you have more direct democracy. And there, would you find that there are the same findings as well?
Mm.
That is what you would not expect if it indeed has to do with just something else, I think.
I didn't get the last part. Why we wouldn't expect?
Yeah, because if you look at an authoritarian system, there probably the conspiracy theories would have to do with the authoritarian government or whatever, and maybe then
Yeah.
your ideas will be different. You're just longing for something that is really different from what you have in your country. And
Yeah.
maybe in an authoritarian state, conspiracy theories will make more sense as well. In many cases, because there are many conspiracies.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it can go both ways because, and it's actually another comment that we received by a review at some point. But obviously, it's hard to do like collect data in multiple contexts. But yeah, it was suggested like Hungary, for example, or and the problem or the issue with this context is that on the one hand, you're right, it would offer like a check of whether the same would apply there or we could detect something similar. But the flip coin is that these contexts it's also contexts where the leaders seem to be overly conspiratorial as well. So it's like it's a different dynamic, right? And a different like let's say social distribution of conspiracism. Because in the context we've been studying this, we're talking about contexts where conspiracy beliefs are the fringe, right, and the non-normal thing. And in this context, you have it's somewhat more normalized to that they come from the top. So it's it would be hard to say why you find or you don't find the same thing. But I think it's definitely a very interesting question to.
You could differentiate, of course, between conspiracy theories that more clearly come from the authoritarian leaders and the ones that come from below, so to say, right?
And that concern the leadership or the minority. There is research studying how conspiracy beliefs work, like that are designed or addressing minority groups, and there are interesting dynamics there.
Yeah. My second point had to do with the first study there. I noticed that you turned around the causal chain there, right?
Yeah.
There you examine the effect of democracy on conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
And I was struggling a little bit with what the mechanism there would be.
Yeah.
You're imagining this country, but how would that? I mean, there is an effect, but how the mechanism? How would that affect how you think about conspiracies in a specific situation? Because it's just an imagined country, you have to imagine yourself, but it's not a country you're part of or something. So
okay, so I think you're addressing 2 points. One is the reversion of causality, and the other is the fictitious character, right? Or
so it's basically what is the mechanism of this effect of democracy on conspiracy theories?
So basically, just a disclaimer that in general, and I was wishing to sketch a model, but I didn't have the time again to cover that. But I think that all of these relationships are, bi-directional. So I don't think there is a like unique causal pathway from one to the other. As for the like mental health, I think these can be basically vicious cycles. So. The idea for the reversion in that vignette was to, as I said, try to address the grievances, like these people's grievances, and give them basically what they think they don't have. So this power, this a properly functioning system, if you want, and that was our rationale. So maybe if you give them what they want, then this need to believe in those theories goes down. But as I said, I think the actual relationship is dynamic and multi-directional. So I think you also have consequences that go from believing in conspiracy theory, so seeing the world in these terms, that has consequences for what you believe about how the system should be and how it should, society should be governed, basically. if it makes sense.
Well, I actually first wanted to ask also about autocratic systems and what we were trying to, but maybe now I can ask about political interest and political knowledge.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in the conspiracies I believe in, right? Probably
Mhm.
is what I would assume. And then interest is positively correlated with knowledge, but then again, conspiracy theories are usually wrong
Yeah.
information. So how do you think political knowledge play into this and are related to this? And is it the more or the less interested people that are more likely to believe in conspiracy theories?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It touches upon another project that we are trying to see how conspiracy beliefs are correlated with different types of, let's say, online behavior. So believing in, consuming news versus using social media, and there seems to be a difference there. So it's one thing to consume news from well-respected sources, and another to just use social media. But I would think I think these people are really invested. So you have different degrees, but like the hardcore conspiracy theorists, they are really invested. So they, for sure, it's very important to them. So I would say in terms of interest, I would expect probably a positive relationship. I don't know of any data actually to support that, but that's that would be my intuition. Yeah.
Interesting things, because it's also a shortcut at the same time, right? It's also so maybe if I'm less interested, it's more appealing to find an easy solution. But yeah, it's interesting to think.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks. You're going between two questions, but I'm gonna interested in the mechanism question. So as far as I understand, you manipulate conspiracy beliefs, and then there's a series of outcome variables.
Mm-hmm.
Could it be that, say, you conceptualize feelings as powerlessness as the mediator towards democratic outcomes, but could it be that this adoption of certain forms of democracy, I'm also just powerless? So could powerlessness, for instance, also be the outcome variable? And in what way is the mediation model being identified in a way of this is the mediator of this effect?
Yeah, not very well. I mean, it's as I said, I think in the sense that I think it can go in various directions. So I'm none of these models is, I present them as the sole pathway or the sole way. I'm not sure I understood your question about the powerlessness.
Well, so for instance, I mean, it invites that you'd say if we make people more powerless, then we offer an intervention, but maybe we should actually invest in democracy, and then people will feel more powerless. Right. So
they would feel more powerless.
Well, so I mean, can we see one?
Yeah.
Can we show?
Which
Doesn't matter which one it is, but I mean, but could it be that, I mean, I express support for anarchism, and I'm also just cynical? Like, so that the support for anarchism is the mediator of cynicism. And so because this invites that we say, well, the solution is to focus on cynicism or the rejection of the status quo. Could as well be the other way around, right?
So that cynicism drives basically belief in conspiracy theories and the.
Well, that you manipulated, but the as far as I understood the research designs.
So the support for anarchism precedes basically cynicism?
No.
I mean, it's like.
Yeah, I mean, like, I mean, it's a difficult, but the research design doesn't, I don't think allows you, like, it
doesn't allow, no, but I mean, psychologically speaking, I don't see how, I mean, I do see it for some other models, but for this one, for example, I don't see why supporting anarchism would make you more cynical. Why? Like,
it could just be the same. I mean, I'm just.
Your ruling classes determine everything, so the current political system is just one cynical show. I think they're pretty much co-determined.
But you probably become cynical first, right?
Why?
Before,
I mean, there's.
I don't know about that. Well, if I read somebody like Ursula Le Guin, I don't get the impression that she's cynical.
Okay, but that's sort of a high utopia for anarchists. But maybe you become an anarchist because you've met a nice girl who's also an anarchist. Then you become cynical. Let's
Yeah.
deny the power of love.
Yeah, I guess that's possible. Yeah, but I would argue it's the least probable, right? I don't know. No, I don't. So for this specific article, we did manipulate rejection of status quo, as I said. So in this case, we did manage to also identify basically this path. But yeah, I guess in general, in terms of political attitudes, it's quite hard. I mean, it's a whole worldview, right? So it's hard to really know what precedes what. And I think it's what is most interesting is the whole system to look at rather than the individual pathways, I guess.
Yeah, in response to that, I mean, now we're talking about cynicism, but especially with the powerlessness items, because we just said they measured domain-specific political powerlessness. So that, yes, that's powerlessness as an emotion, but that's also a bit of an attitude towards politics, right? So there I could really see it also as an outcome measure.
Yeah.
But I don't know the items, of course, but they're like,
no, that's possible. Yeah.
Broad question. So this is about, I mean, the literature on conspiracies has been sort of blossoming in psychology. What does it teach us in a broader sense about belief systems or people in the domain of politics? So why is, because it's a bit of a pillarized literature.
Do you think it's less in political science, right?
No, I think it's the same,
Yeah.
right? But maybe that's part of the, but I would say, what's the broader scope of what can we take from our understanding of humans?
Well, you're asking it very. I could write, I don't know, an ERC project on this question. Well, I guess, on the one hand, it can tell us that there are some problematic things in society. I mean, including in individuals, but also in the system. As I showed the correlates above, I think it's, where is it? But I think it's kind of, it can start from an individual stance, but it can also start from political or socio-political realities, right? And I think, I'm not going to say what we can tell, but I think what is interesting to study and understand is the interplay of these two. So to what extent is it an individual's problem, and to what extent is it, a systemic issue that, and to what extent is it interesting to look at it from one or the other perspective, and how these two interact. But yeah, it's true. It's like blossoming, like absolutely, overwhelming field to be working in, because you can't keep up of, it's very dynamic.
I just tried and kind of failed to find different types of societal stimuli, like threats in that sense. But do you think there is, like, the type of conspiracy matters? Are there dimensions, like conspiracies about leaders messing up, or certain groups messing up, conspiracy about racist conspiracies versus conspiracies that question specifically hyper-rich people? Does that matter?
I know, as I said, that there is work that distinguishes between like upper group and down group oriented conspiracy theories. So it does seem to matter depending on who you are and which group you stand in, whether the theories concern, higher up or lower up in the social hierarchy. That seems to be a very determining factor. Now, in terms of themes, I'm not sure. But I didn't get what you meant by I didn't find stimuli.
Sorry, that was just me, because I tried to look at a group of stimuli and then develop like find different types,
Mm.
and just found that very challenging to find a robust solution there. So I was wondering if you
So
had tried something.
Themes
similar.
in the stimuli that cause threat.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you had like similar challenges with conspiracy.
Yeah, not in my work. No, I haven't.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh. Oh, thank you very much. Oh.